All right, we're gonna try something new here at the Detroit Football Network. Something I had uh, kind of hoped to introduce during training camp, but Frank Ragnow decided to retire. So, what better time than now to maybe explore a little bit of video commentary to supplement the written word that I do. Um, had these plans today, had these plans to be productive, both with work and life. Getting in a workout, doing a little grocery shopping, trying to pound out several pieces of off season content. Um, Got off to a good start up till noon, about four straight hours of work. Then this dropped, and so the day has been derailed. And let me tell you, it was surprising. Someone in the chat asked me if I had any inkling this was coming, and um, no. And let me tell you why. I want to go first back to 2 years ago, to the end of the season, and you'll remember it because the Ragnow's going to retire narrative was full steam. And I had been talking to him one on one before a group of reporters came up, and that kind of grew into a larger thing. But um, I was there for what he was saying, and felt very strongly that people took what he said out of context. And I didn't. I said as much, whether it was on Twitter or radio interviews or whatnot. But um, that was a verified opinion last off season. Went up to a Rags Remember charity event, Frank's charity, that works with children dealing with grief with the loss of a parent. And I got there kind of early. It was up in Lake Orion at the shooting range. They were doing some skeet shooting for the event. And I was able to interview him one on one. We sat at a picnic table, kind of off a quiet corner. And um, first thing I said to him was, retirement's treating you good. And he kind of rolled his eyes and sighed, and we got into it. And he said, that narrative, those stories had really bothered him. Annoyed, frustrated were two words that he used. Um, his explanation of it was on par with my assessment that the comments were taken way out of context. And we kind of closed with, he said he had intended to play, hopefully many more years. And so that was my frame of mind coming out of that conversation ahead of the 2024 season. Now fast forward to the end of the 2024 season, and obviously massive disappointment with the way the Lions exited. Frank was downright shell shocked in the locker room after the game, barely talking above a whisper, clearly heartbroken. But the day after, in the locker room cleanout day, kind of asked similar questions about the retirement stuff. And he said his body felt as good at the finish line as it had in years. And so, those things combined, led me to believe that this thing was keeping on, and didn't really think twice about it. And, now looking in hindsight with maybe some of the ways that guys are being used in these early practices, maybe it was a little bit more than just Ragnow not being there for the voluntary portion of the offseason program, which, yes, was unusual, but also veterans do that sometimes, especially they get up there in the 6, 7, 8 year range, like they just stop coming. And so he's got a pregnant wife. There are other family obligations and considerations. So I didn't think much of it. Um, certainly could have been a contract play, but that didn't make a ton of sense. Uh, but so now we've got to get into thinking, well, what does the replacement plan look like, right? And the Lions actually have um, a lot of centers on the roster, and maybe center is a stretch, or NFL center is a stretch. They have a lot of guys on the roster who have snapped a football in the last 2 weeks. So um, I don't know. I've thrown batting practice. I'm not a pitcher, but um, let's start at the top. Graham Glasgow, veteran. He's done it before. He's done it recently. He did it for full season. I think the last time was Ragnow's rookie year. I don't think Glasgow was a center in Denver. I guess I should double check that. But regardless, he's done it here in Detroit since he's been back. Absolutely capable of doing it. Um, Another top option is going to be Tate Ratledge. Um, it's a weird one because you're talking about a kid that played offensive tackle in high school, strictly right guard in college, and his center experience is limited to fall practice at Georgia last year and these recent early practices in Detroit. Other options on the roster, other guys that have center experience in college or whatever. You got Kingsley Aguakin, undrafted free agent out of Florida last year, and Michael Neese, who's been on the practice squad in Detroit for the last 2 years. And then last and actually probably least, given the experience level and where he's at kind of on the depth chart right now, is Colby Sorsdal was doing a little bit of snapping um, at the most recent OTA practice. I don't think that that's a serious consideration at all. I think they're just kind of experimenting with what possible value he could have as he's battling for his roster life here. Um, just a gut initial assessment, I would guess Graham Glasgow starts at center at week one. Um, Ratledge very well may be the long term play. I think Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach, said it that he thinks he'll probably be a really good center in this league someday, if that's where his career takes him. But it's a really complicated position. There's a lot of nuance and intricacies to identifying protections, getting the calls to the other linemen. And that's a lot of strain to put on not just a rookie, because I think a rookie can do it, but I think a rookie that's played center in a college scheme that's put those responsibilities on his plate, I think can do it far better than a guy that played guard, even at a level like Georgia, just because of the lack of experience. And so I would guess, just based on the way the Lions have been, cramming center reps down Ratlich's throat here, rookie OTAs, at regular OTAs, is they're just trying to get him as much of a taste of it as possible for developmental purposes and long term purposes. I would think Glasgow probably is your safest bet to start center week one. Play Ratlich at guard, and keep giving him those reps. Whether it's during training camp, have him be a first team guard and a second team center. Because I think inevitably what you're going to find is that whoever does start, whether it is Glasgow or Ratlich, the other is going to be the backup for the position. And so, um, you have to have Ratlich prepared for the emergency situation if he's not the guy you go with on day one. And so that's just the way I expect it to play out. You could always keep an Aguakin or a Nice on the practice squad, and call them up if you need an extra body or you're not comfortable with where you know Ratlich's game is by the start of the season. But um, that's just at this moment in time on June 2nd. That's kind of how I see it developing. And then you can move just very similar to Ragnow, where he played guard as a rookie and center as a second year player. And I think you can go that route with Ratlich, or Glasgow's under contract for another year, and it's not unreasonable. I know a lot of people wanted to bury him after some of his struggles last year, but he very well could end up being a really important bridge to the future for the Lions now, not just this season, but I don't think we could take 2026 off the table anymore. Um, Last thing I want to get to is the cap considerations, and I do want to mention, I don't think this was a Barry Sanders situation. I don't think they Ragnow surprised the Lions with this move in any way. I know we are surprised, or most of us are surprised. I'm surprised. Maybe I shouldn't put that on anybody else, but um, I would be very, very surprised if Ragnow wasn't up front with his teammates, with the coaching staff, that this was something he was considering. And when a player is considering it, you have to consider the alternatives because it's the old statement, right? One foot out the door is both feet out the door, and um, you had to be prepared for it. And I think that what we've seen with the way Brad Holmes drafted, with the way they've been utilizing these guys in practice, with Dan Campbell saying he's talked to Ragnow and he knows where Ragnow's at, knows where his mind is at. Last week, I have a hard time believing that the Lions weren't aware that this was a strong possibility, even if they weren't operating in the same mindset of it's definitively happening. Um, but back to the cap consideration. I think there is something to be said for the timing of the announcement um, coming in June. You probably hear sometimes with free agency, with cap casualty cuts, um, the term June 1st designation. And what that means is it's a device within the collective bargaining agreement that allows you to spread a dead money cap hit over 2 years. Um, the dead money is the dead money. Whatever money is owed to Frank Ragnow is owed to Frank Ragnow, or in the case of dead money, has been paid. And so, you know that is what it is. I believe he had, looking at it right now, so he had $8.4 million in dead money, and so if they cut him or traded him or he retired in April and it wasn't designated a post June 1st move, like that 8.4 million would count against the cap this year. Because it's happening after June 1st, and I imagine it'll be treated as such by the league, that 8.4 million would be divided. It's not evenly, it's part of it's this year and part of it's next year, but what it'll do is it'll create 9 million in cap space, for a little bit more than 9 million in cap space for the Lions this year. They don't need that 9 million, but uh, they're clearly trying to get a long-term thing done with Hutchinson. So it helps there. Some of that money maybe could go to Anzalone if they want to, come up with a short-term extension there, or any other of the number of players the Lions need to consider re-signing here in the next year or two. Which brings us to 2026. This will clear more than 12 million off the books. Um, and look, 12 million is 12 million, but you're still, the other side of it, you're losing an all pro. You're losing one of the best centers in the league. But it's also an expensive piece to the puzzle, one they were going to likely have to extend after the 2026 season. He was going to get a raise. He was going to continue to be the highest paid, or one of the highest paid players of the position. That contract may have come in at $20 million a year. So, um, given that Ratlich is making less, significantly less. I don't know. I believe he still hasn't signed his rookie deal, but his contract's probably going to come in the ballpark of 8 million over 4 years, 9 million over 4 years. Um, it's going to be this massive, massive savings, and if he can be 80% the player Ragnar was, it's a tremendous use of resources. If he, obviously, if he ends up hitting his ceiling and being a Ragnow-esque player, like, that's going to be really, really critical for the Lions as they try to manage their roster with Brian Branch and Jameer Gibbs and Sam Laporta, and who knows, maybe they revisit the math on Jamison Williams and see if they could get that to fit. But um, this is the silver lining in this, if you want to call it a silver lining, is that it gives the Lions a little cap flexibility, as they were kind of, and still are, going to be dealing with a looming cap crunch. Um, Personally, hate this. Frank is genuinely one of the best people I've ever covered. Just a wonderful human being, um, accessible, truthful, honest, um, interesting, and available. So you get a handful of those guys in a locker room at a given time. There's probably five or eight of them in there that it just um, always uh, helpful to me doing my job. And when they're good players, then that's the perfect overlap. So it's a major loss for me professionally. It's a major loss for the team, obviously on the field. And I think it's I don't want to say he's going to stop doing stuff in the community, but it's a loss for the work that he does in the community. I mentioned it earlier, the Rags Remembered Foundation, the work he does. Um, it's personal for me. I lost my father at a very young age, and that's a really difficult thing to deal with at any age. Losing a parent, um, but particular, I think during those developmental years. I was 5. I know Ragnow was in early college when his dad suddenly passed away, and is kind of the reason he started this foundation, because they were so close and it was so unexpected. But um, to invest his time that way with children who are dealing with that, I think was what makes you know part of what makes him special. So tremendous loss today. A bummer, but obviously, you know, good for him for doing what's best for him, what's best for his family. He said it best in his own post. He gave everything he had, and I don't think anybody would question that. I don't know if there was anybody quite as sad as Frank Ragnow when he had to miss time. Like you literally had to hold that guy back to keep him from getting on the field. Um, so yeah, like I said, this video is probably went a little bit longer than what I would do normally. Thinking about doing, kind of some video check-ins to supplement um, coverage this season. I was thinking maybe 5 to 10 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week. Um, you guys have asked for it. I'm trying to be audience friendly at all times, trying to hit all the bases, and so look for more video coverage going forward. But that should do us for today. You know who I am. I'm Justin Rogers. Stick with the Detroit Football Network for all your Detroit Lions coverage.